The most productive hour of your day is probably the one where you do absolutely nothing. That sounds like bad advice. But the people who built empires, wrote constitutions, and reshaped entire civilizations treated empty, silent hours the way athletes treat sleep. Skip it, and your performance collapses. And if your calendar has zero blank space in it right now, you're running the same engine they all warned against. Marcus Aurelius ruled Rome, the largest empire on earth at the time, while writing a private journal that nobody was ever supposed to read. Those journals, which we now call the Meditations, were composed in military camps, often late at night, in complete solitude. He wasn't journaling for content. He was pressure testing his own thinking in silence, away from advisors, away from senators, away from anyone who might tell him what he wanted to hear. The entries read like a man arguing with himself, and that was the point. He'd write things like, "You could leave life right now," a reminder directed at himself, alone in a tent, while commanding tens of thousands of soldiers. The silence gave him room to confront thoughts that no general or philosopher would dare voice to an emperor's face. His own mortality, his own ego, his own capacity for cruelty. Those confrontations shaped how he governed the next morning. But Marcus wasn't unusual among effective leaders. He was typical. Winston Churchill called it his daily nap, but the practice went deeper than rest. During the most intense period of the Second World War, bombs falling on London, invasion plans on his desk, Churchill would disappear into a silent room every afternoon. Aides knew the rule: disturb him only if Britain was literally being invaded. He'd emerge roughly 90 minutes later and work until 2 or 3 in the morning with a clarity his staff couldn't match. His physician, Lord Moran, documented this pattern obsessively, convinced it was the mechanism keeping a 67-year-old man functional under pressure that destroyed people half his age. Churchill also painted, alone, for hours. He described painting as a way to give his conscious mind something to do, while his subconscious worked on problems he couldn't solve through direct effort. He was describing decades before the research existed, what cognitive scientists now call the incubation effect, the tendency for solutions to surface after you stop actively searching for them. So why does stepping away actually produce better thinking? Your brain has 2 primary modes of operation. One activates when you're focused on a specific task, reading, calculating, planning. The other switches on when you're doing nothing in particular, staring at a wall, walking without a destination, sitting in silence. That second mode is called the default mode network, and it turns out this idle state is where your brain does its most complex integrative work. It connects distant memories, it synthesizes patterns across unrelated domains, it generates the sudden insights that feel like they came from nowhere. The catch: this network gets suppressed every time you check your phone, respond to a notification, or fill silence with a podcast. Every input demands the focused mode. The default network never gets its turn. You're essentially running your brain on one cylinder and wondering why the engine feels sluggish. Nikola Tesla understood this on an intuitive level. He took long, solitary walks through the streets of Budapest and later New York, often for hours, without speaking to anyone. During one of those walks in 1882, he visualized the complete design for the alternating current motor, the invention that powers essentially every electrical device you've ever used. The full schematic appeared in his mind, unprompted, while he was watching a sunset. He hadn't been thinking about motors. He'd been thinking about nothing. His brain was running the default network at full capacity, and it handed him one of the most important engineering breakthroughs of the 19th century. Tesla later said he could rotate the imagined motor in his mind, examine it from every angle, and identify wear points on parts that hadn't been built yet. That level of spatial reasoning requires enormous cognitive bandwidth, the kind you only get when you've cleared the queue of incoming stimuli. Now, here's where it gets personal. You've experienced this mechanism yourself. You've solved a problem in the shower that you couldn't crack at your desk. You've had a sudden moment of clarity while driving a familiar route on autopilot. Those moments feel random, but they follow a pattern: sustained effort, followed by disengagement, followed by insight. The disengagement phase is where silence lives. Cut it short, and the insight never arrives. Abraham Lincoln was famous for something his cabinet found infuriating. He'd go quiet. In the middle of a war, in the middle of a heated policy debate, he would stop talking and retreat, sometimes physically to a separate room, sometimes just into himself while still seated at the table. His Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, once complained that the president does nothing during critical moments. But Lincoln's letters reveal what was happening in those silences. He was writing drafts he never sent. Furious letters to generals, emotional responses to critics, then putting them in a drawer and waiting. The silence gave him space between his reaction and his response. Almost every major decision of his presidency followed this pattern: pressure, withdrawal, silence, clarity. The drawer full of unsent letters is a detail worth sitting with. Lincoln didn't suppress his anger. He expressed it completely, on paper, alone, in silence. Then he let time and stillness separate the emotion from the decision. By morning, the letter stayed in the drawer. The decision that emerged was almost always better than the one he would have made in the heat of the moment. Critics of solitude argue fairly that isolation can become rumination. A person alone with anxious thoughts can spiral. The research supports this. Unstructured solitude without purpose can increase distressive thinking in people already prone to anxiety. That's a real limitation. But the kind of solitude practiced by Lincoln, Churchill, Tesla, and Aurelius had a specific character. It was intentional. It had boundaries, and it alternated with intense periods of engagement. The solitude functioned as a workshop where raw experience got processed into refined judgment. Rumination happens when you're alone and trapped. Productive solitude happens when you're alone and working, just with tools the outside world can't see. There's a reason every major wisdom tradition on earth arrived at the same conclusion, independently. Buddhist monks, Christian mystics, Stoic philosophers, Sufi poets, separated by thousands of miles and centuries of history, all prescribed deliberate silence as a prerequisite for clear thought. They disagreed on nearly everything else. The convergence on this single practice is striking. When cultures with no contact reach identical conclusions, the underlying mechanism is usually biological, baked into the hardware. And the modern world has engineered silence almost completely out of daily life. The average person encounters a screen within 4 minutes of waking up. Commutes are filled with audio. Waiting rooms play music. Elevators hum. Even relaxation now means streaming something. The spaces where your default network used to run freely have been colonized by content. Every quiet moment is now a moment someone is trying to monetize. The result looks like productivity, full calendars, constant responsiveness, inbox zero, but the quality of the thinking behind all that activity is degrading. You're making more decisions with less clarity, responding faster with less judgment. Lincoln's drawer has been replaced by the send button. The gap between reaction and response has collapsed to milliseconds. Charles Darwin spent decades on a single idea. He walked the same gravel path behind his house every day, a route he called the sandwalk, circling it alone, sometimes for hours, kicking a small stone to count the laps. The theory of natural selection wasn't a flash of genius. It was assembled slowly, in silence, over thousands of solitary laps on a gravel path in rural England. Each lap let his mind turn the idea over one more time. No interruptions, no collaborators. Just footsteps and thought. The gravel path is still there. You can visit it. And when you walk it, the thing that strikes you is how boring it looks. A flat loop through some trees. The most mundane setting imaginable for one of the most consequential ideas in human history. Darwin didn't need inspiration. He needed absence of noise, absence of input, absence of other people's opinions about what his theory should be. You already have a version of the sandwalk somewhere in your life, a commute you could take without the screen, 15 minutes before bed, that currently belong to an algorithm. The most powerful minds in history guarded those empty spaces like they guarded territory because they understood something the modern attention economy is designed to make you forget. Your best thinking happens in the gaps. The question is whether you'll protect them or let someone else fill them in.